In episode 80, Richard Milton pointed out that original ideas do not come from professional scientists locked into their professional paradigm. New breakthroughs come from outsiders who haven't been brainwashed with the prevailing paradigm.
The worrying thing about this is that when you look back at the history of science, it isn't those on the inside that produce the innovations. It's those on the outside. It's the Eric Laithwaites of this world, the people who are perceived as the eccentrics that produce the inventions.
Pierre-Marie Robitaille is a world expert on nuclear magnetic resonance imaging. His brilliant insights into the spectrum of the radiation he was working with enabled him to produce the highest resolution images of the human brain ever made. He's fully aware of the necessity of avoiding stray radiation, usually called noise, while maximizing the radiation coming from the target, which is usually called the signal. He knows this is essential in making reliable images. He understands that a worthwhile image depends on the noise being kept to a low level. In episode 84, we saw some of Robitaille's comments on the image of the black hole, which is claimed to prove that black holes exist. He has even more stunning things to say about that image. The data collection schedule shows that some of the data points must have been fabricated, and the claims for the image itself mean the resolution of the resulting picture is well over 1,000 times better than the observing equipment could actually produce.
You might recall that in the second video, I was concerned with the JCMT-PV and SMA-PV pairs displayed on the world map to the left and their associated signal-to-noise on the lower right. The data on the right was obtained for April 11, 2017. As just mentioned, this data must be acquired when each member of the telescope pairs is simultaneously examining the target. If you look closely, you will see that 4 points are being reported in red for the JCMT-PV pair and 4 more points in beige for the SMA-PV pairs. The signal-to-noise for these pairs is extremely low or non-existent, yet it is used to establish the claimed horizontal diffraction-limited resolution of 25 microarcseconds. Next, have a look at this figure. This reports the observing schedule for M87 in red and 3C279 in blue for each telescope. Let us focus on April 11th on the lower right. While 4 points were reported for the JCMT-PV pair signal-to-noise for April 11th, as we just examined, we find that there were only 3 times on April 11th when both of these telescopes were simultaneously examining the M87 target. So how did the 4th data point ever get acquired? Now examine the PV and SMA observation times. Note that there is only one time period when these 2 telescopes were simultaneously examining the target on April 11th. That means that no more than 1 data point could have been acquired for that pair on that date. So how did we get 4 data points? Is this a case of data fabrication or error in reporting? In fact, if you look at all 4 dates, you will find that the PV-SMA pair was examined between 0 and no more than 3 times on any given date. Clearly, something is not right here. Note also that at no time were the SMA-PV pairs and the JCMT-PV pairs ever used to examine the calibration target. So how did these critical pairs ever get directly calibrated? Finally, let us look at the image itself. If you examine this image, you will note that it is made up of 7,416 pixels by 4,320 pixels. The claimed object at the center is said to have a diameter of about 40 microarcseconds, and the image itself is about 150 by 90 microarcseconds. That means that they are displaying an image with a pixel-based resolution of approximately 0.02 microarcseconds. This is a resolution which is 1,250 times greater than the diffraction-limited resolution available by their telescopes. These scientists, through data processing of coarse data, increased the resolution presented by more than a factor of 1,000. Is there any reason to question why I state now that these images are simply not science? Here is what the real resolution grid looks like for this image. One gets a total of 6 voxels horizontally and about 3 vertically, and that is if one believes that the PV data could even be used. In closing, I restate that black holes cannot exist for the simple reason that they violate pure mathematics and the laws of thermodynamics, as we learned here. Their existence is also rendered impossible by the fact that the Sun has a real surface and is therefore comprised of condensed matter. The stars are not fully compressible objects. This makes all claims of superdense objects untenable.
More than 99.99999% of the data had to be rejected as noise, leaving about 1/100000th of the data to be counted as the signal to make the image. Using that technique, one could produce almost anything. Robitaille has not only shown that the black hole image is a fraud, but that the whole story about black holes is not true. He's also shown that the assumption of sun and stars being made of gas is all wrong. His work on magnetic resonance imaging included a great deal of work on analysing spectra. This work contradicts the standard stories of astronomy, stories about the sun and stars being made of gas produced in the Big Bang. There has to be a surface of condensed matter, matter which is solid or liquid, to make a spectrum like the one observed. He examined the evidence about what goes on in the sun. It shows the sun to be liquid, almost certainly metallic hydrogen.
The ripples on the pond is the strongest line of evidence, and I have covered the problem twice in videos. Such behavior cannot logically be explained in the standard model without suspension of disbelief. Attempts to calculate the ripples in the standard model claim to have been successful, as can be seen in this paper. But the reality remains that such calculations require the presence of a reflective surface within the sun, something which cannot exist in the standard model. These images provide some of the strongest evidence that the sun has a true surface comprised of condensed matter. Still, for me as a spectroscopist, the most important line of evidence for a liquid sun will always be the thermal spectrum. This spectrum cannot be properly accounted for by gaseous plasmas, as I discussed last year in this video and addressed in depth in this paper. It can also not be accounted for by the electric plasma sun, despite claims to the contrary. The only feasible explanation is that the sun is condensed matter, as only condensed matter in the laboratory has ever produced such a spectrum. The doubling of signal intensity at the limb in the X-ray and gamma region also provides evidence for a surface. The list goes on and on. At this point, astronomers need to embrace the fact that the sun has a real surface. The evidence is pointing in this direction, and it is simply overwhelming. It is time for the next generation of scientists to rally behind the condensed nature of the stars, and with that bring a new dawn to astronomy. There is still much to learn from the results brought to us by the Swedish Solar Telescope. As a case in point, consider this small clip obtained in 2006. Here you see a wonderful presentation of granular motion. I have previously suggested that granules and intergranular lanes constitute type 1 metallic hydrogen, whose appearance is governed by directional spectral emissivity arguments, as you can learn in this video. However, it is evident when examining this clip that bright material is essentially floating on top of the intergranular lanes, as you can see here. The point is that the material appears to be immiscible with the surrounding granules, and that highlights that we are observing two different phases of matter. The only reasonable way to account for all these details is to finally accept that the body of the sun is comprised of condensed matter. We are seeing manifestations of different phases on the surface of the sun, and it is incorrect to keep arguing that gaseous plasmas can lead to such detailed structures.
Not surprisingly, the secular scientific journals refused to touch his ideas. His ideas destroy the whole of secular astronomy. But some media they do not control have published his ideas, and some well-known physicists are looking into them. One such physicist is Alexander Unziker. He's come out wholeheartedly behind Robitaille's analysis. He's even written a book, The Liquid Sun, which examines it in detail, in simple, accessible language. Unzicker submitted a paper about it to a conference in Berlin. It was accepted and he was allocated a time slot to present it. But just before the conference, he was told he could only show a poster and talk about it for 1 minute. The significance of that is that it would not give enough time to put forward meaningful support for the idea, and, more importantly, it would not be published in the conference proceedings.
Welcome to Real Physics. Today I will talk about coronal mass ejection and the liquid metallic hydrogen model of the Sun. This was intended as a talk at the meeting of the Astronomical Society in Berlin, Germany. And of course, this model has been developed by Pierre-Marie Robitaille. Robitaille was a famous radiologist. He held the world record in medical imaging in 2000, and then he discovered that there's something wrong with the sunlight, and he developed this model. And of course, there's a lot to say about how Planck's law and about Kirchhoff's law and how the sun does produce light, and about the alternative, how does this strange metallic state discovered in 1935, how does this work? And you can go to Robitaille's YouTube channel, Sky Scholar, and of course you can also read my book, The Liquid Sun. I think I have addressed all these questions in an accessible way now, in an understandable way. But today I'm going to show you the most clear, undeniable and spectacular evidence for the liquid metallic hydrogen model. And you just got to watch that. Now we are watching this coronal mass ejection of 2011, a spectacular event. Material was ejected and for hundreds of thousands of kilometers. Now let's watch that also in slow motion. You see that it lasts for 2 or 3 hours. Now at 6 o'clock in the morning, the material coming out for hundreds of thousands of kilometers at a speed of several hundred kilometers per second. This material travels, and you see it just lights up when it hits the surface here. This is the most important thing to note here. And well, of course, the first question is, what do we see here? But first I show you, it's even more crisp in the X-ray. This is the same event in X-ray images. Let's start the video here. And you see again, look at the material and look at how it falls back and hits the surface, and you see these little explosions occurring. So we must wonder what's going on here. And okay, basically the standard model says that the sun consists of a gas and that's it. Okay, and Robitaille says no, there must be another material. This is condensed matter, this is a liquid. So for Robitaille there is a real surface, something you see here, and for the standard model this surface is illusionary. But if you follow the standard model and think about everything is a gas, so a gas has temperature and it has density, and that's it. I mean, how do you imagine that? I mean, the obvious guess is that the ejected material is much hotter and denser than the surroundings, but how does a bubble of hot and dense gas race through very thin other material of the same kind without being dissolved immediately? That's very, very strange. And then it comes back and smashes the surface. How does such a smash up between gas and gas produce light in the first place? This is the question the standard model cannot answer.
We might ask, why the refusal of the secular establishment to accept the idea? Well, for a start, remember what Bjorn Eckerberg said about scientists in episode 75.
Taking a framework away from a scientist is the same as making them blind. Like, then we have nothing to guide us by. It is much more convenient to add things to the model and preserve the existing structure than it is to radically rethink it.
If you challenge the core assumptions of their paradigm, they're lost. They have no framework to build on. It's as if they were blind. And for another thing, the current secular establishment's policy of publish or perish. It requires its servants in the scientific community to publish a minimum number of papers in the establishment's journals every year. So the scientific community have become experts at devising projects within their ruling paradigm. And as Kuhn noted, their research has become a strenuous and devoted attempt to force nature into the conceptual boxes supplied by professional education. If the situation were to arise where the existing paradigm is challenged, and a new paradigm has to be devised, their well-worn paths would be gone. Their well-understood ways to justify research grants and to churn out vast numbers of PhDs and endless papers would disappear into thin air. It would take time to settle into a new paradigm. And another problem, the best in the field dictum. It will not allow a theory vital to a paradigm to be declared invalid until an acceptable alternative, acceptable, that is, to the secular establishment, has been approved. That could lead to the situation where one starts a research project knowing full well that its assumptions are all wrong and it's founded on quicksand. If the paradigm were then to be acknowledged to be false, and another accepted before the project is finished and papers on it published, would one be required to start another research project, or would it be acceptable to submit something now acknowledged to be worthless? But the biggest problem was noted by Simon Holland and Richard Milton in episode 80.
As a kid growing up in the UK, the Royal Institution Christmas lectures fascinated me. In the 1970s, a friendly, straight-talking Yorkshire engineer called Eric Laithwaite was invited to host 4 Christmas lectures.
Watch it again carefully. A fact about a spinning wheel that so far everyone has missed.
There was a stunned silence. I remember it well. He unleashed the floodgates of the scientific establishment's wrath. You've brought science into disrepute. Laithwaite is no longer part of the club.
I suppose you could say, does it matter if science ridicules and ostracizes a person who doesn't play by the rules? But I think it does matter. I think it matters to all of us because practically every major advance in technology in the last 100 years has been some kind of defiance of the rules. But this derision, this perception of the research being without value, without merit, that alone can be enough to kill off promising lines of research.
If you dare to stand against the paradigm, the secular scientific establishment will utterly destroy your status, your reputation, and your career. And this particular revelation about this false theory has absolutely disastrous consequences for the whole of their astronomical house of cards. The story about how stars form, how they evolve over all those billions of years, how they collapse to form neutron stars and supernovas and black holes. The whole story, derived from Fred Hoyle and his successors' all hell let loose computer programs, is based on stars being just gas. The garbage in, garbage out rule guarantees that all their conclusions are nonsense, no matter how impressive the programs may be. Everything they've been observing for decades, they've interpreted in the light of theories that have collapsed. Everything they've been telling us, and themselves, is just speculation based on wrong assumptions and a strenuous and devoted attempt to force nature into the conceptual boxes supplied by professional education. What the establishment will try to do is what they did with Hoyle, when he pointed out that accepted theories were untenable. In his books, he pointed out that the creation of the universe is not explainable without intelligence. And in his last papers he was allowed to publish, he wrote, "A common-sense interpretation of the facts suggests that a super-intellect has monkeyed with physics as well as with chemistry and biology." The establishment stopped publishing his papers, denied him the Nobel Prize he richly deserved and gave it to a minor collaborator. Then they hounded him out of the world-famous Institute of Astronomy, which he founded at Cambridge University. Very effective ways to stamp out anyone dissenting from the accepted paradigm. But I believe that now there's a very different situation in astronomy. The Big Bang Theory has collapsed beyond redemption.
Astrophysicist Erica Nelson of the University of Colorado Boulder thinks her team may have made a discovery that she says would break the theory of how the early universe formed.
Either this is wrong or this is a huge discovery. And we think that it's a huge discovery.
Nelson is investigating what may be 5 giant galaxies that appear to have formed much too quickly after the Big Bang.
Is finding things that we didn't expect, that we can't explain, because that means that we have to revise our understanding of the universe.
The James Webb Telescope stands as humanity's grandest and mightiest space instrument ever deployed, yet no one was expecting it would pose a challenge to the Big Bang theory. The telescope's recent observations are compelling astronomers to reconsider their understanding of the universe's origin. Renowned physicist Roger Penrose didn't hold back in describing the astonishing discoveries made by the JWST. The problem lies in the fact that the James Webb Space Telescope is disrupting the current understanding. Suddenly, we realize that we may need to revise all the textbooks that explain the beginning of the universe.
Many scientists have realized that there's something very wrong with science. They're talking about it on the internet. There are several thousand who subscribe to channels like those of Robitaille and Unziker. If the establishment continues to ignore all this, then trust in science as now being pushed onto an ever more skeptical audience will soon lose what little credibility it still has left. Its atheistic commitment to purely materialistic ideas, no matter how thoroughly proved to be wrong, must at some stage make things obvious, even to the dedicated atheists. The fool hath said in his heart, "There is no God." Corrupt are they, and have done abominable iniquity. And for this cause God shall send them strong delusion that they should believe a lie. Because that when they knew God, they glorified him not as God, neither were thankful, but became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools. Thank you for joining me for this episode. If you enjoyed it, please like, subscribe, and press the bell so that you'll be notified as I release new movies. If you'd like to support this project, you're welcome to do so through Patreon. Find a link on my channel banner and in the description below.